Kamesu michakara viramani sikapadam samadhiyami. That was a Theravadan version of the same precept, and translated from Pali, it reads, I undertake the training to abstain from sexual misconduct. So Faith and Bigori, welcome to Great Dragon Mountain on St. Paddy's Day, on this blustery, rainy, wonderful Saturday morning. Special welcome to those of you with ZP3 and anybody who's here for the very first time. A big pat on the back for coming out in this weather. I look around and I see a lot of you bundled up. This could be Antaiji, where the snow, this is a training temple in Japan, where the snow comes up to the rafters, oftentimes actually blows into the zendo. And their webpage says, expect the temperature on the inside to be the same as the outside. Each month, as you know, we devote a Saturday morning to studying one of the precepts. I often encourage people, when you see it on the calendars, kind of think about that precept during the week before you come in. And for those of you that are new to this practice, I want to give you just a quick overview, courtesy of Roshi Atkin. He says these precepts formulate the realization of inherent good. This good is not the opposite of bad. It is self-nature, Buddha nature. All beings by nature are Buddha. Only delusions and attachments prevent them from bearing witness to that fact. The precepts are a guide from self-centered delusion and attachment to the Buddha's own full and complete realization of truth and compassion. They point the way to the fulfillment of your own Buddha nature. Even with their imperative implications, moral injunctions are expressions of love. It is an act of love sometimes to say, don't do that. Either way, as a presentation of unity with all beings or as a corrective device, the precepts are expressions of compassion. So we can say that the 10 precepts are simply 10 different ways of showing love. Isn't that beautiful? Thank you, Roshi. Well, at first blush, when I looked at this, sexual misconduct, chaste conduct, I came to it, and honestly I said, what's in this for me? Maybe you felt the same way. I'm blessed in that I have a wonderful relationship, a wonderful wife, and not to be maudlin or sound maudlin, but she's my best friend, my wife, and my lover, and it's a wonderful relationship. So, sexual misconduct, how does that apply to me? Well, I'll have to admit, there is the reptilian brain part, that there is attraction going on, which I guess that proves the old adage about I may be old, but I'm not dead. And I thank God for that, as we all should, because that's how we get little baby Buddhas from that urge. Well, there's good news and bad news with these precepts. Good news is that they're very broad and appropriate to all aspects of our life. That means there's something in there for everyone. The bad news is they're very broad and appropriate to all aspects of our life. There's no escaping. So this precept means more than just misusing sexuality. It goes to the cause of that, which is greed. In fact, I remember years ago during my precepts class here, when we studied this precept, it read, "Do not be greedy." And from the class notes that I had, I saw a quote that says, "Greed nests in sexual conduct." So that's kind of opens it up a lot more. Sex and greed, pretty powerful stuff. So on my own journey with this, and I've been working with the precepts for a long time, over a decade, and I've noticed that working with the precepts, this one in particular, there's been this road or path towards simplicity in my life. That's how it's affected me. And it's been a gradual process. There's sometimes big shifts, sometimes little shifts, but much of it coming out of reflecting on this issue of not being greedy. Carla and I, years ago, took a class, in fact, called Voluntary Simplicity, which is a class where you learn how to live simply. And we've incorporated a lot of things into our lives from that class. I get a lot of input from Muke, Brown Green Group. I've taken a lot of things that we do here at the center and incorporated them at my home. Well, in the last few years, a bad business and a poor economy have helped the move toward living simply considerably. After 32 years of living in the same house, we were forced to downsize, move into a much smaller place. Well, I'm telling you, that was a wild experience. There were times I was short-tempered, even with Carla, forgive me, but just disgusted with the amount of stuff that we had accumulated over that time. So this purging ended up being really a wonderful experience. Simplifying. You could sense the freedom that comes from that. Now, I will say, however, I kept all my books on Eastern religion and philosophy and my beloved poetry books, but with a rationalization that someday there's going to be a Zen center of San Luis Obispo, and this will be the seed library for that monastery. I've also been a student of diet, nutrition, and exercise for many, many years. And I am absolutely in love with oryoki. A lot of people don't care for oryoki. I just think it's lovely. And this concept of just enough. And I've taken that concept and applied it to my own life. And I've dealt with all sorts of things. Ayurvedic eating, vegetarianism, veganism, and now even green drinks. But I'm using this, we have what in our meal gatha, it's regarding greed as the obstacle to freedom of mind. So the short report is things are going pretty well with this. I am just so disciplined at morning meal and lunch. Just great portion size, balanced nutrition, just enough. But somehow, evening meal, not so. The emotional eating kind of takes over. I'm inhaling hummus and chips. They're good. It's hummus that my wife makes, and we make our own chips out of organic corn tortillas. But it does take over. So in our household, there's no freedom of mind after 6 o'clock. Now I want to, you can tell this is part of a much longer talk that I'm going to do at the prison. I want to shift gears a little bit, go back to this idea of chaste conduct and not misusing sexuality, and my experience with unchaste conduct and misused sexuality. I was listening to the news about a week ago, when I was preparing for the talk, and I was at my parents' house, and the broadcaster announced, another Southern California teacher investigated for alleged sexual misconduct with a student. It seems to be getting out of hand. It seems to be that there's an epidemic here. It's probably just the tip of the iceberg. I work with inmates, with prisoners, and we're not there. Normally, we don't ask them why, what crime they've committed. But I've been with some of these guys shoulder to shoulder with 12 years now, and things just kind of come up when you spend that much time with them. And more often than not, they themselves have been victims when they were boys or young men. Victims of child abuse, rape, sodomy, violence. I have friends where I know that this has affected them, and I can see the trauma that it's caused in their lives. Everybody sitting in the Zendo, I know, knows people where the experience of sexual misconduct has somehow touched them, if it hasn't happened to you. So for some, there are deep scars. For others, I find that I'm working with, they are still open and weeping wounds. So what are we to do? I'm not a trained psychologist or therapist. So what I do is take the principles that I learned on these very grounds and approach it from not knowing, bearing witness, and in this case, of course, it's bearing witness to some pretty traumatic pain. And then look for loving action. In most cases, this is just listening, letting them talk. And I'll get toward the end because I'm getting a look already from Plum Hermit. A few weeks ago on 60 Minutes, I don't know if any of you saw that, though, they had an interview with the Archbishop of Dublin. And it was really a powerful piece. The Archbishop has turned over documents that expose many of the abuses in the Catholic Church with young men and women. He spoke to one man who told him of being 8 years old when he was raped in a chapel. And the Archbishop was so traumatized by this, he went to a school the next day and asked to see the other 8-year-olds so he could get a real sense of what had happened. I often think of one of my favorite hermit monk poets, Ryokan, from the 1700s. He wrote, "Thinking about the people in this floating world far into the night, my sleeves are wet with tears." And it's really difficult not to cry. So they asked this Archbishop, why do you think the church turned their back on this for so long? And he said, they cover it up because the priests were supposed to be perfect. They had an image of what they should be, and they kept to that image rather than to the reality. So aren't there some lessons to be learned here? Do you know what the Archbishop did? Something they said the church in Ireland has never done. He held a service of atonement with these victims, these abuse victims. Prostrated himself in front of the altar, and then as an act of humility, washed their feet. Wow. Sounds familiar, huh? Atonement. Sensei Cohen is working with me to get a program, an atonement ceremony that we can use at the California Men's Colony. I had a little poem by Rumi, but this was just for Dharma Joy, and I couldn't get a Mary Oliver poem. But I know our time is short. So join me, if you will, in reflecting on this precept today and see what this precept of chaste conduct conjures up for you. After being in silence, we'll have a tea snack over in the Sangha house, and at 11:30 we'll reconvene down in the Dharma hall for council.